About 6 years ago, I moved to another city for work. I worked for a 911 ambulance service that responded to calls in the city, as well as the county, which had a few other small towns. The city itself was not a large city, about 100,000 people. Working for that service required working 24-hour shifts. It wasn't particularly busy. Maybe you'd get 5 or 10 calls in 24 hours, and generally get some decent sleep at night. The city was a pretty rough place, as the oil industry had boomed there, which drew all sorts of folk from around the country to work in the oil fields nearby. One night in January, me and my partner, who was an EMT basic, received a call in the next town over. It was about 2 a.m. when the call came out, and the only information we had was that a person in an apartment called 911 after hearing the downstairs neighbour screaming for help. We responded emergent as the details were very limited. When we arrived on scene, police and fire departments were already there, and we were getting ready to make entrance into the building with them. The person who called 911 was there and told us which apartment she heard the screaming from. We attempted to pound on the door at first to get the resident to come to the door. When no one answered, the fire department got ready to spread the door and make entry. Luckily, the landlord showed up and gave us keys to get into the unit. As we opened the door, the creepiness started. The apartment was pitch black, not a single light, as if no one was home. Police entered first, and with our flashlights, we followed. Looking around the apartment, the kitchen and dining room looked like a hoarder's nest. I'm not exaggerating when I say there were literally 5-foot-tall mountains of garbage, food, dishes in the kitchen. The same in the living room, but with magazines, clothes, and more garbage. This meant there was only a very narrow walkway to navigate the apartment. Officers proceeded down the hallway ahead, where the bedroom and bathroom was. One of the officers stopped at the bathroom door, as there was light shining from underneath. The officer opened the door, and just stood in the hallway. With a flat tone, he said, "She's in there." I walk in first into the bathroom. The first thing I notice is the peculiarity of the light. It's a very, very pale yellow light coming from a single bulb on the ceiling, similar to those old heat lamps that used to be common in bathrooms. The light gave off an odd vibe, as it was just so unnatural. The next thing I noticed is the lack of anything in the bathroom. No floor mats, no toilet cover, no towels, no knickknacks. Just nothing. Empty. Except the vanity which contained the sink. On top, in the bowl of the sink, were approximately 20 to 30 makeup bottles piled up. Some were opened and leaking, causing there to be powders and liquids everywhere. The last thing I noticed was the body of an elderly woman lying naked in the tub. As I walk closer, I can see her lying on her side, nearly in the fetal position. Her skin is pale, and there's about 8 inches of water in the tub. Looking at her face, her eyes are closed, and her head is against the bottom of the tub, with her mouth and nose completely submerged underwater. My partner steps in behind me. He suggests we just call the coroner and inform them of the body. 2 officers pile into the bathroom behind my partner, so there's 4 of us in this tiny bathroom, with me next to the lady in the tub. With me being who I am, I decided to do my due diligence and at least make sure the lady is dead. I kneel down next to the tub and reach my arm and put my fingers on the neck, attempting to check for a carotid pulse. In an instant, without warning or the slightest hint of movement, the woman springs up out of the tub with the agility and speed of a feral cat. The only reaction I was able to manage was to just stand up as quick as possible, and I just stood there, staring at her. She stared back at me, eyes wide as can be, before she started screaming at me. She attempted to cover herself with her hands as best she could, while sitting in the water still. I quickly look around and notice everyone else who was in the bathroom with me bolted out of there. Not a single soul in sight. I tried to steel myself and tried calming the lady down, telling her who I was and why I was there. She denied screaming and told me she does this every morning as she does some kind of joint condition, and soaking in warm water helps ease her joint pain. Now at this point I have my doubts, and I have to question this woman's sanity. I question her regarding self-harm, and address what potentially could be interpreted as suicidal behaviour. She denies all of it. The next step is to determine her mental capacity to ensure she's in the right frame of mind to make reasonable and appropriate decisions. She answers all my other questions appropriately, and at this point, per the law, she's able to refuse any and all care as she's mentally sound. I ask her if she will at least allow me to check her vitals so that I can be sure she is healthy and I can add it to my reports. She vehemently refuses and tells me to get out of her house, which she has the right to. I acknowledge and have a sign a refusal of service form. As I leave the bathroom, my partner, the 2 officers that were in the bathroom with me, along with the 2 other officers and firefighters that were waiting in the apartment, are just staring at me with wise-eyed and gaping mouths, speechless. I don't say a word, and we all leave the apartment. Once we all got outside, I had the most uneasy, uncontrolled fit of laughter. My partner and the other officers started laughing too. I thought I might shit myself. My partner told me later that all he remembers is seeing her move, hearing me say, "Oh fuck," which I don't even remember, and running out of the bathroom. I wish I could say I never saw this lady again. That would be untrue. About 3 months after the first call with the bathtub lady, I'm working with another EMT basic partner. Not the same one as before, but he's well aware of the story. So the day is going by like normal, and nightfall comes. I'm hoping to get some sleep, as generally night is a little calmer. Each of our stations have a few bedrooms with twin beds to allow us to at least sleep somewhat comfortably. Take off my boots and lay down and doze. I always keep my radio turned way up and by my head so I can wake up if we get a call. Sure enough, tones drop on the radio and I wake up. Looking at the clock, it's around 4 AM. Radio traffic requests the ambulance for a welfare check on an individual who's not been seen for a while. Me and my partner get up, put our boots on, and start responding to the address. As we get closer, I start recognizing the area. Before I even see the building, I tell my partner, "I swear to God, if it's the same fucking lady." He just laughs and we continue. As we pull up on the scene, same, sure as shit, same fucking building. At this point, my heart starts to race again. A few officers are already on the scene. As I get out of the ambulance, one of the officers comes up and tells me, "The lady we are here for has a friend that works at the gas station nearby." The friend told 911 that the lady usually comes and visits them every day, but the friend hasn't seen her in a few weeks. The officer also tells me there's an odour coming from the apartment complex. If you work in EMS or have been around such, you know what that means. If not, then I won't spoil it just yet. I asked the officer if she's familiar with this person, or has heard the story of the last encounter. The officer tells me she's not, but her 2 co-workers behind her were on the original call with me, and are smiling, but not saying a word. I tell the officer who the person is, and our last run-in with her. The officer just raises an eyebrow a bit and says, "Okay." So we approach the apartment complex yet again. As I open the main door, you can immediately smell the odour permeating through the entire complex. We walk downstairs to the door of this lady's apartment. I bang on the door a few times and shout, "Ambulance." No response. Officers bang on the door. No response. We try to get a hold of the landlord again to give us access, but he's unavailable. Over the radio, I request the fire department and request they bring the door spreader. The fire department arrives and they come downstairs and set up the door spreader. If you don't know what a door spreader is, it's a tool that the fire department places between the 2 door jambs and use a lever to start pressing the door jambs apart, freeing the latch from the door frame so you can get in. As they finally get the door open, the awful wafting smells spill out of the apartment. Same thing as last time. Pitch black, piles of garbage all around the apartment, 5 feet high, that barely allow you to move through. Though this time it's a bit different. There are thousands of flies buzzing around. Again, the officers enter first, with us following with our flashlights. One of the male officers gets down the hallway to the bathroom and opens the door. He looks at me, shakes his head, and continues forward. My EMT partner, who was pretty new, is right behind me. I turn to him and tell him to wait in the hallway, and that I'll let him know if I need him. I was trying to be nice and spare him. The officer continues down the hallway toward the bedroom. At this point, the anxiety is increasing because now we're in uncharted territory, and once again, I have no idea what we're going to find. The officer eventually makes it to the bedroom. I see him shine his lights at the bedroom, then uses the bend of his elbow to cover his mouth and nose. He waves me over. As I walk to him, the smell only gets stronger. I peer in the bedroom with my flashlight, and that's when I see her. The bedroom is set up so the bed is right in the middle of the room, with the head pressed against the wall. So there's some space on either side at the foot of the bed, or at least there would be if the floors weren't filled up to the height of the bed with clothes, magazines, books, food, and garbage. At the foot of the bed are two large 4-foot tall piles of random shit that at the base are probably 4 feet in diameter. I know it's hard to visualize, but picture two large conical shaped mounds side by side at the foot of the bed. In the tiny space between the huge mounds and at the foot of the bed lies Bathtub Lady. Now this lady is a very small old lady. When I saw her the first time, she maybe weighed 90 pounds. She's also white. Stunned for a moment, I stand there next to the officer and just look. This is the part that gets grotesque. Bathtub Lady is lying perfectly on her back with her arms folded up and crossed in front of her like you would see a skeleton doing in the movies. Bathtub Lady's skin looks almost like paper. It's dried out and shrunken, turning black and rotting. The level of decomposition from her is one I hadn't seen before. Her hip bones were visible where the skin had cracked and receded. Her kneecaps were coming through her skin. A few ribs were just barely visible, poking through the skin on the sides of her upper abdomen. Her hair was beginning to fall out. Her lips were gone. Her eyes were gone. I got a bit closer to look. All I kept thinking was, if you wake up, this officer's probably going to draw and shoot you in the head. I walked a little closer to look. She was almost perfectly preserved like a mummy. There was absolutely nothing left of her eyes. The sockets were completely empty with the exception of maggots crawling around in the sockets. From behind me, I hear a couple quiet, muffled gags. I walk back out to my partner. I tell him, sorry man, but we need the body bag, and I need your help. Everyone walks outside to get some fresh air. The officer that was with me in the bedroom gagged a few more times outside, but luckily didn't vomit. The one thing about this is that we had recently been given these really nice PAPR respirators from FEMA for a recent Ebola outbreak. My partner grabbed the body bag, and I grabbed the PAPRs. We put on our gear and walked back inside. The officer that was with me, like a fucking champ, came back inside as well, without a respirator, and held the flashlight for us. Me and my partner had to spend 10 minutes just clearing out all the trash, so we had enough room to put the body bag down next to the bathtub lady. Once we got enough room, the sketchy part came. If you've ever seen a body with that amount of decomposition, it's very brittle. We attempted to move it as carefully as we could, as to not break anything. However, when we attempted to move her, she was stuck. We couldn't figure out what was going on. I was at the head, my partner was at the feet, trying to move her over. I put my arms down her back and neck to support the head so it didn't break off. I got down to look as I lifted to see what we were getting stuck on. As I lifted, I saw it was already too late. As I lifted, the skin on her back was stuck to the carpet. So as I lifted, it started peeling off her ribs and spine. We had no other choice as we were unable to cut the carpet at this time. As we lifted her up, all of the skin came off her back and stayed stuck to the floor, almost like some sick chalk outline, which is when I saw it. What seemed to be like 1,000 maggots crawling around on the inside of her skin, between the skin and her back. We moved her gently into the bag, luckily not breaking anything. We got the bag out and into the ambulance, where we would then transport her to the funeral home with our windows rolled down and emergent, so we wouldn't have to stay in the ambulance as long as possible. So what's my story of the bathtub lady? Sorry for the gross details. What we figured is she died shortly after our first encounter with her, and that we may have been the last ones to see her alive. When I was 14, my aunt and uncle hosted a family reunion. This is a yearly tradition They do, since they are very social, and most of us live in different states. We took the short flight to Arizona, and we were the first to arrive. We brought our dog and introduced my cousin's dog to her. Us kids played on our older cousin's Xbox as our parents talked and gossiped in the kitchen, as more relatives piled into the house. Eventually, most of the family had arrived at the house and had gotten significantly louder. My younger brother, who's a very loud person, was screaming on the bouncy house with my other younger siblings and younger cousins. It was somewhere around the afternoon when we were feeling pretty hungry. My older cousin asked his mom when food would be ready. However, she said it would be another hour. We were kids, and kids don't take no for an answer. So we hatched a plan for my older cousin to secretly drive to a store, buy some chocolate, and drive home. But our younger siblings wanted to go too. We decided me, my older cousin, his younger sister, and my younger sister would go, and the others would stay at home in case anyone thought it got too quiet. We made our journey to the nearest store, and my older cousin bought some chocolate. For some reason, I was standing outside the car watching the store when this woman approached me. She asked me some pretty normal questions like, "Are your parents inside the store? And are you alright?" I answered with a simple yes and waited for her to leave. However, she did something I didn't expect. She grabbed my arm firmly and dragged me towards a lone black car parked on the other side of the parking lot. I froze, not knowing what to do, and just looked up at her. That's when I heard my cousin scream, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing?" The woman promptly let go of me and just drove off. I jumped into the car and we floored it back home. Being dumb kids, we didn't tell our parents about this incident, and now that woman is roaming free. I was 13 when this took place. Before I start the story, I just want to give you some background information. This happened with my 3 best friends. I'll call them Glasses, Redhead, and Curly. Redhead was very adventurous, liked to push the boundaries, sneak out and stay out long into the night. Glasses was kinda influenced by Redhead, but had very strict parents, and sometimes wouldn't be allowed out. Curly was a stickler for the rules, and would rarely follow us crazy kids in our weird shenanigans. She was also the oldest in our group. Now I'll begin the story. We were riding our bikes along our neighborhood at night. We liked to do this a lot, and knew the best routes to take. We cycled up to the top of a huge hill with an amazing drop. The hill gave you a rush of adrenaline you'd get from a roller coaster. So we were rolling down the hill when this van pulled up, nearly hitting me. Redhead screamed, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" And we all stared into the abyss the van drove into, hoping to get a license plate. That's when we saw the car lights turn on. We pedaled away, turning back to see if it was following us. And it was. Curly was crying, and Glasses looked like she was about to pass out. Eventually lost the guy, but we were pretty shaken up. A month later, we were riding our bikes at night again, when Glasses wanted to go to the bathroom. We didn't want to lose her at night, so we waited in front of her house. We were cracking jokes and being hyper when suddenly we hear, "Hey," yelled from across the street. Glasses comes out and asked us, "Wait, what's going on?" Then we hear, "Hey, come over here, bitches. Not so brave now." We all cycled home, and Redhead claimed she saw a van just like the one we saw a month ago. This is the final and most terrifying incident. It happened solely to Redhead. We were cycling and it was daytime when this black van drove past us. It stopped, drove back so it was in front of us, and said to Redhead, "Don't fuck with me," and then listed her address. It again drove off before we could get a license plate. After that, Redhead received threatening letters in the mail. It got so bad, Redhead and her family moved from NorCal to her grandparents' house in Massachusetts. We recently found her via Snapchat, but the horrors of those nights still terrify her. Growing up, I was lucky enough to be born into a wealthy family of 4 at the time, with a brother and sister living in Australia. I don't remember any of the residents I was born into, but the second house we lived in was one I would never forget. My parents had purchased a massive old mansion. When I say old, I mean they had slave quarters built into the house. I believe my mum even has old black and white photos of the original owners in front of the house, which I'll try to find and link. After my parents purchased the property, they almost immediately started renovations. The first signs that something paranormal was going on with or in the house was when the builders told us so. We had multiple builders claim that the house was haunted. One painter refused to go back into the house, only saying it was haunted. The other builders, however, weren't as bothered. I distinctly remember one of them telling us he thought it was a very friendly haunting, so he didn't mind working on the property at all. Fast forward to when renovations were almost finished, and we're living in the property. Although there was 5 of us living in the house, my brother even sleeping in the slave quarters, only my mum and myself experienced paranormal encounters. I remember countless sleepless nights, laying in fear, covering my head with my blanket, wishing the nights away. Almost every night, I would be visited by multiple paranormal things. I'm not sure what they were, and would love people's opinions, but the best way I can describe it is dark silhouettes. However, when they first appeared, there was a great shine of light. Our horse was located near the airport, so we had multiple planes take off over our house. If it was dark, we would sometimes have some light from the planes shine into our house. But the light that was emitted when these silhouettes appeared was unlike any light I've experienced before. I was so scared of them. But looking back, I'm unsure if they emitted a frightened feeling, or if it was me just being a young child. I was a terrible sleeper when I was young, often waking up, bawling my eyes out. This was the most common time when I would be visited by the silhouettes. I remember I had a toy clown that had a sort of rounded bottom, so you could push it, and it would bounce right back up. It had bells on it also. It wasn't a big toy, maybe 15 centimeters high in total. Often, these silhouettes would tip this over to make it rock back and forth. Again, I was so frightened. Them just showing up was enough for me to hide under my blanket and not make a sound, forcing myself to stop crying. They would also often whisper my name over and over, but almost how you would call a dog's name to get its attention, in a very light, happy voice. Years later, when I discussed this with my mum, she saw what was happening from her room. My bedroom was situated in a way that she could see my doorframe from the bed. She would hear me crying, and then see the big burst of light gradually building at my door, and suddenly disappear. And I would stop crying. Again, out of fear mostly, lol. She would also get chills and not be able to move while it was happening. She also experienced other things, such as hearing a child's voice, beckoning her to find them, when she was on the 3rd floor and we were all playing outside. This went on for years until we finally sold the property, which wasn't easy in itself when your 7-year-old is running around telling every potential buyer at the open that the house is haunted and they visit him every night. We did finally sell the property, and Mum even received a call from the new owners, angrily stating that we should have disclosed that the house was haunted in the sale. Mum pretended that she didn't know what she was talking about. As you can imagine, I was so excited to move into a house and finally sleep relatively peacefully. Especially when I was getting older, I started to understand I was experiencing hauntings of some kind. The house we moved into is another mansion, but this time decades newer. Later, I found out this was at Mum's request. We bought brand new TVs, couches, beds, everything for the new house, except we brought my wardrobe. I only made the connection to the wardrobe after we finally got rid of it, and the haunting stopped. In the meantime, things were even worse in the new house. I'm not sure if I was older, so I have a better memory of the time. I understood more what was going on, or if things were truly more intense in the first house. I used to have to sleep with a lava lamp, as all through the night, not just when I was crying, the silhouettes would show in greater numbers, dance all around my room and whisper my name, almost urging me to reply. I remember even replying with a simple hello, but the whispers would just get louder and more intense, and I would have to sleep in my parents' room, where I was left alone by the silhouettes. The silhouettes would almost start being more of a solid. I remember I would often feel the weight of them sitting on my bed, which was truly terrifying. One night specifically, I awoke to find someone sitting on the end of my bed. It was the early hours of the morning, dark outside, and my dad was sitting on the end of my bed, fully clothed, just looking at me. I remember specifically being weirded out by the fact that he was fully clothed when he would have been sleeping. I asked him, "Dad?" And he gave me his trademark smile and a wave, but he didn't say anything. I reached over to touch him, and he immediately disappeared as I touched him, and the weight lifted off my bed. I didn't think I touched him, or if I did, I didn't feel anything. As I said, this continued until we finally got me a new wardrobe, out of pure luck, just needing a new one. In the second house, the haunting specifically only happened in my room. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I've had a lot more paranormal experiences in my life since then. So I've been playing D&D for a while. I started back in middle school, where I was playing Pathfinder, and it was one of my favourite things ever. Recently, I've been with some of my old school friends, but we don't get to hang out a lot, so I've been joining other groups, trying to satisfy my addiction. One of the recent groups I joined was really disheartening. It's nothing horrible, but still. One of my buddies suggested I check a local board for groups on Discord. The one I found was a party of 4, and the DM who wanted a 5th party member. Nothing alarmed me, it was a 5th edition campaign with a photo of a friendly looking bunch. I gave them a message, and they're very inviting, asking about my experience and how I like to play. I was enjoying the atmosphere and I was excited to begin. My character was a level 4 fighter and a level 2 rogue, NG Drow. He was a saboteur for a Drow kingdom, a member of a group of guerrilla fighters causing havoc and all kinds of attacks behind enemy lines. Initially, he was a loyal soldier, but after years of killing innocent groups and eventually being turned against the rogue faction in his home, he lost his loyalty to the kingdom. He left with some difficulty, but now is trying to find a peaceful life. The DM liked the idea of the character, and since the group was already level 7, he was fine with it. The reason I was only level 6 at my suggestion to compensate for rarer items, like a musket and small explosives and some other things. I was absolutely positively, without a question of a doubt, psyched. Now for the rest of the crew. First was our Orc Grave Cleric, whose tribe all died mysteriously and whose wife was a drow. Secondly was the Barbarian Human, who had previously been a bandit leader, but the party convinced him to join them. The third was a fighter bard Firbolg, previously a gladiator with a flair for showmanship. And finally, the Shifter Monk, who was terribly boring, until later. My party met me when I stumbled upon them being terrorized by deranged wargs and getting slaughtered somehow. Bad rolls and a lot of wargs. I thought they were taking pot shots, basically from close by. Normally my character would have let them handle it on their own, but he knew these wargs had been driven crazy by his kingdom, and his team had released them to cause havoc on the local farmers. I take out a few and they win, before my character can slink off. I'm cornered by the barbarian, who's demanding to know who I was and what black magic I was using. The DM reminded him guns like that weren't unheard of, just rare, and they weren't very advanced. But the barbarian claims he was probably doesn't, and the DM agrees. I didn't care. I responded, "Not magic, sir. Advanced warfare. That's all. I'd be happy to demonstrate." The grave cleric chimes in. "I've never heard of such a thing either." He definitely had, but he seemed to not care. I ended up explaining my gun functions to them, and the two of them ended up getting mad and threatening me. If it hadn't been for the fighter stepping in and saying he'd seen one during his time in the arena, our characters ended up getting along really well. The fighter had grown disgusted by the bloodlust of the crowds, so he'd left seeking something else in life. Honestly, I was loving the campaign right off the bat. I hadn't even thought about the other two's odd behaviour. The fighter ended up convincing the party and my character to join the party. I was able to prove how capable I was when some spirit or something began terrorising anyone who lived there, with more of the wargs and bigger creatures as well. The mayor of the town tells us the spirit had been about for ages, sending deranged animals into towns, but only 1 or 2. Not the suddenly dozens that were ripping through the communities and wargs were never seen around here. My character, of course, knew where they had come from. I informed the fighter about what was going on. Only him. Much to my annoyance, the barbarian actually managed to eavesdrop. But why he decided in character, I don't know what the DM let it slide. He liked drama. He rushed to the cleric and the monk who was having a town hall meeting discussing where the spirit had been seen. Barbarian, everyone listen. Dark elf scum is responsible. Cleric. What? The Dark Elf is a spy from the Underdark. He and his comrades have been summoning monsters here to destroy the valley, and they've been using the spirit to do it. Now this miffed me. He'd heard every word I'd said, and the DM said as such and was so clearly lying, but the DM asked for no bluff. The town just bought it. Monk. Wait, how do you know? Barbarian. I just heard him talking to the fighter. They're in league. Our characters showed up, having heard the barbarian yelling. Me. What's happened? Is everyone alright? Farmer. There's the bastard. Fighter. Wait, what? Cleric. I should have known. Where are your men? How many are there? Me. Genuinely confused. Men? What is this? Fighter. He didn't do anything. Naya. You and your Underdark fiends have brought the monsters upon us. Me. No, listen, please. Yes, when I was a soldier we released the warg, but that's why I'm here now. I'm trying to undo that. Monk. You liar! Townspeople start getting angry, jeering and threatening me mostly. And the fighter. Me. Please, I promise, I'll do everything in my power to hunt down every last warg and this spirit. I won't ask for a payment or praise. I will bring the body of every warg in this valley. On diplomacy, the townsfolk seemed to consider it. Not the barbarian. He drew his mace and charged me. Barbarian. No more lies. I shoved the fighter away and duck away with a narrow evasion. I hit him with the butt of my gun and run, dragging the fighter as everyone else takes chase. I end up dashing into the woods, throwing one of my explosives at a tree, bring it down on the cleric. The barbarian tries to go through it, to no success. Both of them were being idiots. The monk wasn't. He was a shifter and could turn into a wolf sort of, and burned a Kai point just to catch up in no time. He decked me, sending teeth flying. I came back with a knife. I didn't do this! Monk ignores me and I take another hit before the fighter uses his net to entangle the monk, and I knocked him out with the butt of my gun. We ended up escaping, but spent the rest of the night rolling stealth checks to escape. I hear the barbarian lose it when the DM says we escaped. He starts ranting about a lot of things. The cleric adds remarks every once in a while. Apparently, the barbarian had from the start had a problem with my character's three main concepts. First, guns. Despite the DM saying they were fine, he said it gave me a super unfair advantage. My musket was best at a distance and got the round before being reloaded. Secondly, drow. They were an evil-only race, not a PC race. Don't know why he said it was a problem. Finally, my desire for a new life. He said it was stupid, despite that being his exact character's bandit to hero thing, and Drow couldn't just change to NG alignments. It was dumb, and in the end, I grew tired of petty insults and announced I was done. I got several hostile messages from the barbarian, an apology from the DM, and Monk, who had just been having fun, and the cleric blaming me for the whole thing falling apart.